So speaking on behalf of the name of the Lord was a tremendously weighty cause, and so the speaking on behalf of God, and that's why in preaching we have to be very careful that it's what we affirm in pulpits and in Bible classes and in personal study and in public study, that it's always the Word of God. Because of correspondence. If I were to say there's one person in class, one student in class, and then that would accord with the facts. And mathematically speaking, there's mathematical correspondence there. So it's an if and only if test in mathematics. And this truth correspondence test for truth is all over the Bible. In Genesis, send one and let him bring your brother while you remain confined, and your words may be tested whether there is truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So here's this accusation that when Jacob's brothers come to, not Jacob, Joseph's brothers come to Egypt, Joseph doesn't reveal himself immediately to his brothers, and then he sends them on their way. Let's see if you're telling the truth. Let me test you. So the correspondence test of truth is alive and well in that account in Joseph's day. Deuteronomy 18, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass, or come true, this is the word that the Lord has not spoken. So here, experience must accord with a proclamation. And if experience doesn't affirm what the prophet has declared, the prophet's a liar and the prophet could be put to death. So it's that correspondence test of truth that would, under the law of Moses, allow a false prophet to be put to death. So speaking on behalf of the name of the Lord was a tremendously weighty cause, and so the speaking on behalf of God, and that's why in preaching we have to be very careful that it's what we affirm in pulpits and in Bible classes and in personal study and in public study, that it's always the Word of God. The coherence test of truth is a negative test, while the correspondence test or correspondence theory is a positive one. So make sure you know this, Jet, because I've been known to put this on tests. Coherence is a negative test for truth. Well, what do I mean? So let's take an example to see if I can make that clear. You're in a car accident and you're by yourself. Okay, Jet's driving along. A car runs a red light and you T-bone them. There's 5 people in that car. They get out and they say, "No, Jet ran the red light. It's his fault we got into this accident." Well, the police show up and they've got to figure out who's telling the truth. You're both claiming the other one ran the red. Well, let's say that the 5 people in the car agree and they say, "Oh, all right, when the law enforcement people get here, here's our story. That other guy ran the red light, and that's why we got into this wreck." So what you have is you've got one person's testimony, your eyewitness encounter versus theirs, and you've got a coherence test that the police officers are going to try to say, well, there's disagreement here. So what they might do is start taking the 5 witnesses of the one car and start seeing if their testimony disagrees somewhere. And because all they have on from your claim is that they ran the red light. Although their testimony agrees, they're all going to say that you ran the red light. It's false ultimately because of the correspondence test. It doesn't correspond with reality. It doesn't correspond with what actually happened. So what the law is going to try to do is saying, okay, somebody's lying. You both can't be right. I mean, it's possible that you both, there's never, they'll know because they know that both lights are not always ever red at the same time, except maybe for a millisecond, right? We both ran the red. Well, they can look and say, no, the light's never red in both directions long enough to cause an accident, right? That the law has put this, civil laws put that in effect. So somebody's not telling the truth. So who's not telling the truth? Then that's the law enforcement. They may take the 5 witnesses and start asking them even more detailed questions and comparing their stories with yours. And then when they say, oh, hey, these 5 are telling different stories in this detail. So a lot of work for law enforcement to try to figure out who's telling the truth. But their testimony in part could be coherent, but what they're going to continue to probe for is where the coherence breaks down, or where your testimony disagrees with theirs, or where there's another witness who saw the accident that could say, oh, yeah, hey, the five over there, they're lying. Because I was right behind Jet, and I just saw what happened, and those people fully ran the red light. So, that's the work of law enforcement. But I want you to see that the five, their testimony is coherent. And although it agrees, doesn't necessarily make it true. So we're getting into the majority witnesses, right? So merely because we have a majority of testimony doesn't necessarily make it right. Because you can get people, you look in the crucifixion of Jesus, and there are, if I remember right, instances where they sought false witness against him. I know they did that. Pretty sure they did that with Paul as well. So merely because you have a witness that tells a lie and you have other people that support that view doesn't make it true, right? And the truth, a clear exposition of the truth. And so that's why in American law, it's an adversarial system. What do I mean? Well, you've got a plaintiff and you've got a defense. You've got an accusation. You've got a claim that's being, a charge in a criminal case. Let's say it's first-degree murder. Well, it's an adversarial system. The state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in first-degree murder charges that you done it. You don't want it to be, well, it looks like he did it. You don't want a preponderance of evidence to either put you to death or lock you away forever or for dozens of years. You don't want it to be more likely than not. Well, it's more likely than not that he did it. We don't really have anyone else that it looks like did it, and it seems like they may have. It's more likely than not. That's a preponderance of evidence. You don't want to be locked away based on a clear and convincing evidence standard. In other words, you want a higher burden of proof. You want a higher threshold of proof to be met before you spend your life in prison or before you're put to death. So the courts realize this, and that's why the state has the obligation to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt in capital murder cases, first-degree murder, that you did it, not based on a preponderance of evidence, that is more likely than not based on clear and convincing evidence, but based on evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. In other words, the level of certainty is such, and the evidence is so demonstrative and so definitive that you, not someone else, not your wife, not your children, not your neighbor, not someone, you did it. So, DNA can put you there, forensics can put you there, other people's eyewitness testimony can put you there. It might be circumstantial evidence that puts you in the crime, and you could be put to death based on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence isn't necessarily a bad or uncertain burden of proof. You could have multiple lines of evidence that put you at the scene doing the crime, and then they might put you to death for that. So coherence is a negative. So merely because testimony agrees doesn't necessarily make it true. It's true because it corresponds to reality. Does that make sense? The difference between coherence and correspondence? I want you to get that.
Yes. Yeah, I guess I can see like people could. Well, there's also, it's basically, I'm fine and correct, but it's like religious organizations. There's a coherence among all of them that they believe the same thing, but it's not necessarily the truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Okay.
because you have many evangelical faiths that say you're saved at the point of faith, trust, that could be coherent among Presbyterians, among Baptists, among community churches. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So you're spot on.
Coherence or correspondence.
Right.
What was?
So you would say that you would disagree with those faiths because it does not correspond to the Bible.
Okay.
So